Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in words and deeds and relationships of Torah. We are starting a new book of Torah, the book of Leviticus, Sefer Vayikra. So, of course, we'll be turning to chapter 1, verse 1 is where we'll be starting. And at this point, I'm going to invite everyone to go ahead and unmute so that we have the opportunity together to recite our blessing for the opportunity of immersing ourselves in Torah. And then we'll read the opening verses. I'll share the opening verses, and everyone will have an opportunity to share in reading some verses as well. And then we'll have a little bit of focus study I'll present, and then we'll have everyone have the opportunity to share your own thoughts and reflections as well. So if you'd like to go ahead and unmute, and together we recite our blessing. Baruch Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity of immersing ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. If you'd like to go ahead at this point and remute, then I will share the opening verses, and then I'll invite others to have the opportunity to read as well. So again, chapter 1, verse 1, the book of Leviticus. Adonai called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when any of you presents an offering of cattle to Adonai, he shall choose his offering from the herd or from the flock." Now we're at verse 3, and Dave, would you like to start reading there, verse 3?
If his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he shall make his offering a male without blemish. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting for acceptance in his behalf before the Lord. He shall lay his hands upon the head of the burnt offering, that it may be acceptable in his behalf in expiation for him. The bull shall be slaughtered before the Lord, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall offer the blood, dashing the blood against all sides of the altar, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The burnt offering shall be flayed and cut up into sections. The sons of Aaron, the priest, shall put fire on the altar and lay out wood upon the fire. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall lay out sections with the head of the suet on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. Its entrails and legs shall be washed with water. The priest shall turn the whole into smoke on the altar as a burnt offering, an offering of fire, of pleasing odor to the Lord.
Thank you so much, Dave. Margot, would you like to begin reading at verse 10?
Sure. If his offering for a burnt offering is from the flock of sheep or goats, he shall make his offering a male without blemish. It shall be slaughtered before the Lord on the north side of the altar, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall dash its blood against all sides of the altar. When it has been cut up into sections, the priest shall lay them out with the head and the suet on the wood that is on the fire on the altar. The entrails and the legs shall be washed with water. The priest shall offer up and turn the whole into smoke on the altar. It is a burnt offering and offering by fire of pleasing odor to the Lord.
Thank you so much, Margot. And Todd, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 14?
Certainly. If his offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, he shall choose his offering from turtle doves or pigeons. The priest shall bring it to the altar, pinch off its head, and turn it into smoke on the altar, and its blood shall be drained out against the side of the altar. He shall remove its crop with its contents and cast it into the place of the ashes at the east side of the altar. The priest shall tear it open by its wings without serving it, and turn it into smoke on the altar, upon the wood that is on the fire. It is a burnt offering, an offering by fire, of pleasing odor to the Lord.
Thank you so much, Todd. Steve, would you like to begin reading at the very start of chapter 2?
Yes, thank you. When a person presents an offering of meal to the Eternal, the offering shall be of choice flour. The offerer shall pour oil upon it, lay frankincense on it, and present it to Aaron's sons, the priests. The priest shall scoop out of it a handful of its choice flour and oil, as well as of its frankincense, and this token portion he shall turn into smoke on the altar, as an offering by fire of pleasing odor to the Eternal. And the remainder of the meal offering shall be for Aaron and his sons, a most holy portion from the Eternal's offerings by fire. When you present an offering of meal baked in the oven, it shall be of choice flour, unleavened cakes with oil mixed in, or unleavened wafers spread with oil. If your offering is a meal offering on a griddle, it shall be of choice flour with oil mixed in, unleavened. Break it into bits and pour oil on it. It is a meal offering. If your offering is a meal offering in a pan, it shall be made of choice flour and oil. When you present to the Eternal a meal offering that is made in any of these ways, it shall be brought to the priest, who shall take it up to the altar. The priest shall remove the token portion from the meal offering and turn it into smoke on the altar as an offering by fire, of pleasing odor to the Eternal. And the remainder of the meal offering shall be for Aaron and his sons, a most holy portion from the Eternal's offerings by fire.
Thank you, Steve. Let me invite Richard. Would you like to read starting there at verse 11?
Yes, please, thank you. No meal offering that you offer to the Lord shall be made with leaven, for you must not turn into smoke any leaven or any honey as an offering by fire to the Lord. You may bring them to the Lord as an offering of choice products, but they shall not be offered up on the altar for a pleasing odor. You shall season your every offering of meal with salt. You shall not omit from your meal offering the salt of your covenant with God. With all your offerings, you must offer salt. If you bring a meal offering of first fruits to the Lord, you shall bring grain in season, parched with fire, grits of the fresh ear, as your meal offering of first fruits. You shall add oil to it and lay frankincense on it. It is a meal offering. And the priest shall turn a token portion of it into smoke, some of the grits and oil, with all of the incense as an offering by fire to the Lord.
Thank you, Richard. Let me invite Peggy and Jim. Would you like to read starting at the start of chapter 3?
Thank you, Rabbi. If his offering is a sacrifice of well-being, if he offers of the herd, whether a male or a female, he shall bring before Adonai one without blemish. He shall lay his hand upon the head of his offering and slaughter it at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall dash the blood against all sides of the altar. He shall then present from the sacrifice of well-being as an offering by fire to Adonai the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is about the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them. That is at the loins, and the protuberance on the liver, which he shall remove with the kidneys. Aaron's son shall turn these into smoke on the altar, with the burnt offering which is upon the wood that is on the fire, as an offering by fire, of pleasing odor to Adonai.
And this is offering for sacrifice of well-being to Adonai is from the flock, whether a male or a female, he shall offer one without blood. If he presents a sheep as his offering, he shall bring it before Adonai and lay his hand upon the head of the offering. It shall be slaughtered before the tent of meeting, and Aaron's sons shall dash its blood against all sides of the altar. He shall then present as an offering by fire to Adonai the fat from the sacrifice of well-being, the whole broad tail, which shall shall be moved close to the backbone, the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is about the entrails. The two kidneys and the fat that is on them, that is at the loins, and the protuberance on the liver, which he shall remove with the kidneys. The priest shall turn these into smoke on the altar as food and offering by fire to Adonai.
Thank you both so much. Let me invite Paul. Would you like to read some beginning there at verse 12? And you'll need to unmute, Paul. Paul, you'll need to unmute so you can share what you'd like to say.
Thank you, Rabbi. And in my version, I don't have odor, I have aroma.
Lovely.
Okay. If his offering is a goat, he shall bring it before Hashem. He shall lean his hands upon its head and slaughter it before the tent of the meeting. And the sons of Aaron shall throw its blood upon the altar all around. He shall bring the offering from it as a fire offering to Hashem. The fat that covers the innards and all the fat that is upon the innards and the two kidneys and the fat that is upon them, that is upon the flanks, and he shall remove the diaphragm with the liver, with the kidneys. The Cohen shall cause them to go up in smoke on the altar. The food of the fire for a satisfying aroma, all the choice parts for Hashem. An eternal decree for your generations in all your dwelling places. You may not consume any fat or any blood.
Thank you, Paul. Let me invite Justin. Would you like to read at the start of chapter 4?
Thank you, Rabbi. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a person sins unintentionally by committing one of all the commandments of the Lord, which may not be committed, and he commits part of one of them. If the anointed Cohen sins, bringing guilt to the people, then he shall bring for his sin, which he committed, an unblemished young bull, as a sin offering to the Lord. And he shall bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord, and he shall lean his hand forcefully upon the bull's head and slaughter the bull before the Lord. And the anointed Cohen shall take from the bull's blood and bring it to the tent of meeting. And the Cohen shall dip his finger into the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times before the Lord, before the dividing curtain of the sanctuary. And the Cohen shall place some of the blood on the horns of the incense altar, which is in the tent of meeting, before the Lord, and he shall pour all the blood of the bull onto the base of the altar used for the burnt offerings, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And all the fat of the sin offering bull he shall separate from it, the fat covering the innards, and all the fat that is on the innards, and the 2 kidneys along with the fat that is on them, which is on the flanks, and the diaphragm and the liver along with the kidneys, he shall remove it, just as was separated from the bull sacrificed as a peace offering. The Cohen shall then cause them to go up in smoke on the altar used for burnt offerings. He shall then take the bull's skin and all of its flesh, along with its head, and along with its legs, its innards, and waste matter. He shall take out the entire bull to a clean place outside the camp, namely to the ash depository, and he shall burn it in the fire on wood. Thus it shall be burnt in the ash depository.
Thank you so much, Justin. Robin, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 13?
Yes, thank you. If it is the community leadership of Israel that has erred, and the matter escapes the notice of the congregation, so that they do any of the things which by Adonai's commandments ought not to be done, and they realize guilt, when the sin through which they incurred guilt becomes known, the congregation shall offer a bull of the herd as a sin offering and bring it before the tent of meeting. The elders of the community shall lay their hands upon the head of the bull before Adonai, and the bull shall be slaughtered before Adonai. The anointed priest shall bring some of the blood of the bull into the tent of meeting, and the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle of it 7 times before Adonai in front of the curtain. Some of the blood he shall put on the horns of the altar, which is before Adonai in the tent of meeting, and all the rest of the blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He shall remove all its fat from it and turn it into smoke on the altar. He shall do with this bull just as is done with the priest's bull of sin offering. He shall do the same with it. The priest shall thus make expiation for them, and they shall be forgiven. He shall carry the bull outside the camp and burn it as he burned the first bull. This is the sin offering of the congregation.
Thank you, Robin. Mark, would you like to read beginning at verse 22?
Yes, thank you. In case it is a chieftain who incurs guilt by doing unwittingly any of the things which by commandment of the Lord his God ought not to be done, and he realizes his guilt, or the sin of which he is guilty is brought to his knowledge, he shall bring as an offering a male goat without blemish. He shall lay his hand upon the goat's head, and it shall be slaughtered at the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered before the Lord. It is a sin offering. The priest shall take with his finger some of the blood of the sin offering and put it on the horns of the altar of the burnt offering. And the rest of its blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering. All its fat he shall turn into smoke on the altar, like the fat of the sacrifice of well-being. Thus the priest shall make expiation on his behalf for his sin, and he shall be forgiven.
Thank you, Mark. Let me invite Dave. Would you like to read there beginning at verse 27?
If any person from among the populace unwittingly incurs guilt by doing any of the things by the Lord's commandments ought not to be done, and he realizes his guilt, or the sin which he is guilty is brought to his knowledge, he shall bring a female goat without blemish as his offering for the sin of which he is guilty. He shall lay his hand upon the head of the sin offering, and the sin offering shall be slaughtered at the place of the burnt offering. The priest shall take with his finger some of the blood and put it on the horns of the altar of the burnt offering, and the rest of its blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar. He shall remove all its fat, just as the fat is removed from the sacrifice of well-being, and the priest shall turn it into smoke on the altar for a pleasing odor to the Lord. Thus the priest shall make expiation for him, and he shall be forgiven.
Thank you, Dave. Jay, would you like to read beginning at verse 32?
Okay. And it shall be slaughtered as a sin offering at the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered. The priest shall take with his fingers some of the blood of the sin offering and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and all the rest of its blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar, and all its fat he shall remove, just as the fat of the sheep of the sacrifice of well-being is removed. And this the priest shall turn into smoke on the altar over a noise offering by fire. Thus the priest shall make expiation on his behalf for the sin of which he is guilty, and he shall be forgiven.
If the offering he brings as a sin offering is a sheep, he shall bring a female without blemish. He shall lay his hand upon the head of the sin offering, and it shall be slaughtered as a sin offering at the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered. I'm just repeating some of this. The priest shall take with his finger some of the blood of the sin offering and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and all the rest of its blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar. And all its fat he shall remove, just as the fat of the sheep of the sacrifice of well-being is removed. And this the priest shall turn into smoke on the altar over Adonai's offering by fire. Thus the priest shall make expiation on his behalf for the sin of which he is guilty, and he shall be forgiven. And let me invite Margot, would you like to start us off on chapter 5?
Sure. If a person incurs guilt when he has heard a public imprecation, and although able to testify as one who has either seen or learned of the matter, he does not give information so that he is subject to punishment. Or when a person touches any unclean thing, be it the carcass of an unclean beast, or the carcass of an unclean cattle, or the carcass of an unclean creeping thing, and the fact has escaped him, and then, being unclean, he realizes his guilt.
Thank you. Let me invite Todd. Would you like to continue there at verse 3?
Yes. Or when he touches human uncleanness, any such uncleanness whereby one becomes unclean, and though he has known it, the fact has escaped him, but later he realizes his guilt. Or when a person utters an oath to bad or good purpose, whatever a man may utter in an oath, and though he has known it, the fact has escaped him, but later he realizes his guilt in any of these matters. When he realizes his guilt in any of these matters, he shall confess that wherein he has sinned, and he shall bring this penalty to the Lord for the sin of which he is guilty, a female from the flock, sheep or goat, as a sin offering, and the priest shall make expiation on his behalf for his sin.
Thank you. Let me invite Steve.
Sure.
Would you like to continue there at verse 7?
Yes. But if one's means do not suffice for a sheep, that person shall bring to the Eternal, as the penalty for that of which one is guilty, 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a purgation offering and the other for a burnt offering. The offerer shall bring them to the priest, who shall offer first the bird for the purgation offering, pinching its head at the nape without severing it. He shall sprinkle some of the blood of the purgation offering on the side of the altar, and what remains of the blood shall be drained out at the base of the altar. It is a purgation offering. And the second bird he shall prepare as a burnt offering according to regulation. For the sin of which one is guilty, the priest shall thus make expiation on behalf of that person, who shall be forgiven.
Thank you. And let me invite Richard. Would you like to pick up there at verse 11?
Yes, thank you. And if his means do not suffice for 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, he shall bring as his offering for that of which he is guilty 1/10 of an ephah of choice flour for a sin offering. You shall not add oil to it or lay frankincense on it, for it is a sin offering. He shall bring it to the priest, and the priest shall scoop out of it a handful as a token portion of it, and turn it into smoke on the altar with the Lord's offerings by fire. It is the sin offering. Thus the priest shall make expiation on behalf for whichever of these sins he is guilty, and he shall be forgiven. It shall belong to the priest, like the meal offering. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when a person commits a trespass, being unwittingly remiss about any of the Lord's sacred things, he shall bring as his penalty to the Lord a ram without blemish from the flock, convertible into payment in silver by the sanctuary weight, as a guilt offering. He shall make restitution for that wherein he was remiss about the sacred things, and he shall add a 5th part to it and give it to the priest. The priest shall make expiation on his behalf with the ram of the guilt offering, and he shall be forgiven.
Thank you, Richard. Let me invite Justin. Would you like to continue at verse 17?
Thank you. If a person sins and commits one of the commandments of the Lord, which may not be committed, but he does not know, he is guilty, and he shall bear his transgression. He shall bring an unblemished ram from the flock with the value for a guilt offering to the Cohen. The Cohen shall make atonement for his unintentional sin, which he committed and did not know, and he shall be forgiven. It is a guilt offering he has incurred, guilt before the Lord. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, if a person sins, betraying the Lord by falsely denying to his fellow concerning a deposit, or money given in hand, or an object taken by robbery, or he withheld funds from his fellow, or he found a lost article and he denied it and swore falsely regarding any one of all these cases whereby a man may sin. And it shall be when he has sinned and is guilty that he shall return the article which he had robbed, or the funds which he had withheld, or the item which had been deposited with him, or the article which he had found, or anything else regarding which he had sworn falsely. He shall pay it with its principal, adding its fifths to it. He shall give it to its rightful owner on the day he repents for his guilt. He shall then bring his guilt offering to the Lord, an unblemished ram from the flock with the same value, for a guilt offering to the Cohen. And the Cohen shall make atonement for him before the Lord, and he shall be forgiven for any one of all cases whereby one may commit a sin, incurring guilt through it.
Thank you so much, everyone. That is our Torah portion for the week, the opening portion for Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. Every year when we come to the book of Leviticus, it always feels to me like such an abrupt switch from either the drama of Genesis, the story of creation, the stories of these early individual ancestors of ours, and an abrupt switch also from what immediately precedes the book of Leviticus, that of the book of Exodus, which is full of this drama of the story of slavery in Egypt and the dramatic tale of the liberation and the parting of the sea and the moment at Mount Sinai. And then we get to this story, this book of Leviticus, which on the one hand, just as a piece of literature, is empty of any kind of narrative drama. It's this recitation of these rules having to do with the sacrificial rites. And also because up to this moment, we've heard stories about these individual human beings, stories about the entire people in the book of Exodus. And then in the book of Leviticus, the whole focus seems to be on a very discrete group of people among the Israelites, the Levites, those who have a rather privileged role, one might say, within the leadership of the Israelite people. So it always feels to me like such an abrupt change of both narrative tone and a focus in terms of the characters that it's addressing. So this year, as I was studying it, I thought the only way the book of Leviticus really makes sense is because of what's happened before, that we really couldn't have a book of Leviticus without what I would call the condition precedent, the stories of what's happened both in Genesis and the story that about the people as a whole. So I'd like to kind of explore what it means that Leviticus is coming after Genesis and after Exodus, how they set the stage and give shape and meaning and purpose to what's occurring in the book of Leviticus. If you have the study sheet that I sent out, at the very top is a painting by our Israeli artist Yoram Ra'anan, Clouds of Canopy. And he's characterizing here the cloud that would settle upon the Mishkan, settle perhaps over the people. And we're going to explore to see what role that plays in setting the stage for what we've just read. And I've entitled the study focus, Leaders Who Make Themselves Smaller, or I believe in what I sent out earlier, I said, characterize it as the big smallness of good leadership. So we're going to focus a little bit on what constitutes good leadership, and what does smallness have to do with it, and how do we derive a sense of bigness out of that smallness. So I'd like to begin by a rather puzzling notion that we kind of carry over from last week, the end of last week's Torah portion at the end of the book of Exodus. So that's number 1 on the study sheet from chapter 40, verse 35 of the book of Exodus, which says, Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it, and the presence of God filled the Mishkan. Kind of a puzzling notion. Well, why couldn't Moses enter into the Mishkan? Here's what had happened. The Mishkan had been set up. They were getting ready to anoint it and bring it into service. And somehow God was preventing, if you will, Moses from entering into the Mishkan to get it ready for this service that it was going to be inaugurated for. And so why was God preventing Moses from getting in? Why couldn't Moses get inside the Mishkan? And then it's a rather confusing way that our Torah portion, the beginning of the book of Leviticus, starts off, because we have this verse, the very first verse. God called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. Now, one way of understanding that verse is, oh, well, we just ended the book of Exodus with this notion about the presence of God filling the Mishkan. So that means God's presence is in the Mishkan, and Moses couldn't enter the Mishkan, so he's outside the Mishkan. And so one way of reading this verse is, Moses is outside the tent, the presence of God is inside the tent and speaking to Moses from inside the tent. But our commentators don't read it quite that way. And we have Rashi here who's going to summarize some of the conundrum that's involved in this formulation and in the way the Hebrew itself is constructed, and points out something quite different. So Rashi writes, from the tent of meeting. This teaches us that the sound of the voice would be cut off and would not go outside the tent. So what Rashi is pointing out is the Hebrew says, Vayikra el Moshe, and he spoke to Moses, Vayedaber Adonai Elav, and God spoke to him, Me ohel moed lemor, from the tent of meeting, and said. So he's looking at the order in which these words are appearing. And this bit of commentary, which is followed by many others in addition to Rashi, says, look, the order of the words is showing us that the voice was heard only by Moses because he was inside the tent, and that the sound didn't travel beyond it. Because if the verse had wanted to tell us only where God's voice was emanating from, it should have identified that at the very beginning of the sentence, as in, God called to Moses from the tent of meeting, and God spoke to him. But that's not what it says. It says, God spoke to Moses, God called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. So this bit of commentary is understanding is what's not important is where God is speaking from, but how far the voice would travel. And in that sense, Moses is now inside the tent. So here's our commentary. It says, no, Moses wasn't outside the tent, he was inside. So what does this bit from Exodus, which is saying that Moses couldn't get into the tent, what was this momentary exclusion of Moses from being inside the tent all about? What was the purpose of that? So our next bit of commentary is from Rashbam, who was actually the grandson of Rashi. And he says, Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it to show the Holy One's love for the people of Israel. Then the cloud shifted inward and settled upon the ark. And we have this verse from earlier in Exodus. And there, at the ark, where the cherubim are, that's where I will meet with you and speak with you from above the cover. So the Rashbam is now bringing in an earlier verse from Exodus, which says, I will speak to you from above the cover that's on the ark. So this must mean then that Moses is inside the tent, he's by the ark, and that's where he's hearing God's voice. And Rashbam's explanation about why Moses couldn't immediately go into the tent is because God wanted to make sure that all of Israel understood that God loves all of Israel. That was an essential precondition to inaugurating the services that we're about to discuss and read about in Vayikra. Everyone needs to understand God loves everyone. Now, if that's clear, now we can begin to assign some specific roles about how this ritual of the sacrificial rites is going to play out. What about the Moses? I don't know if you can see it in the edition that you have, but the very first word of our Torah portion, Vayikra, the aleph at the end of the first word is much smaller than the other letters. That's the way it's written in the Torah scroll. And that's the way it's written in my edition of the Tanakh. I don't know if that's the way it is in yours. So the question, of course, comes up, why is the aleph, the letter at the end of this first word, so small? Number two, we have one bit of midrash which says, well, Moses really wanted to write it as, instead of Vayikra, Vayikar, to make that last aleph almost disappear. And when you have the word Vayikar, what you've got then is a verb that says happened upon. So now the verse would read, and God happened upon him. How does that change things? Well, that makes it seem as if Moses is saying, hey, I wasn't summoned by God. I wasn't called by God. We just bumped into one another. So a kind of a way I thought of kind of contemporizing this is, imagine that you're at the county fair and you're walking through the county fair and you just kind of bump into the president of the United States who's there eating corn on the cob or something like that. And the president says, oh, hi, Carol, very nice to see you. How are you doing today? Let's talk about some things. How do you think things are going? What do you think about how the rollout for the vaccination program is working? And Carol talks to the president of the United States. It just kind of happened, right? If you contrast that with the President of the United States calls Carol and says, Carol, I want you to come visit me inside the White House. Oh, that has a very different feeling to it. You've now been summoned. How important are you? So that's why when Moses says, I would just as soon it have said, Vayikra, we happened upon one another, rather than God called me, is an indication, this Midrash tradition would say, it's an indication of how humble Moses was. That he didn't want it to be so presumptuous that he was being called by God. We also have, there's some additional Midrash about how the Aleph is so small because some of the ink, Moses didn't want to make a big deal about himself. And so where did the extra ink go that would have been for the larger Aleph? Some of the ink went onto Moses's head. And some Americans say that was really the source of the radiance that we had just encountered back last week, where Moses' face was now radiant. So the radiance in that commentary comes from his humility, and the ink that otherwise would have gone into a larger size olive, it's placed upon Moses' skin and is the source of his radiance. So in a sense, his humility is the source of his radiance, if you will. So then we have some further building upon this commentary by the Tosafists were some of them were, the earliest ones were also descendants of Rashi. And then over the next 100 years or so, there were additional great scholars in France and Germany during the 12th and 13th century, known as the Tosafists. And their tradition says, Moses constantly lessened himself before God and before the people of Israel. So all this tradition of commentary that we're following now is presenting Moses as someone who humbled himself, who didn't want to make it seem as if he was puffed up, a self-aggrandizing leader. He was very humble. Okay. So now if you turn over, we're going to look at a bit of more recent commentary, and this is by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. He writes, when we place self at the center of our universe, we eventually turn everyone and everything into a means or an end. That diminishes them, which diminishes us. Humility means living by the light of that which is greater than me. When God is at the center of our lives, we open ourselves up to the glory of creation and the beauty of other people. The smaller the self, the wider the radius of our world. So Rabbi Sacks is teaching us something about when we make ourselves smaller, we make the world around us bigger. We make our world bigger. We not only allow for more people to have presence within it, but we become more aware of others. We enlarge ourselves by making ourselves smaller. And so let me now take it to a more perhaps mystical or spiritual realm through Rav Kook, the great Kabbalist of the earliest 20th century, who's now going to put it in the context of white space and black letters. This is the reason that Moses made the Aleph of the divine call smaller, since it belonged to the realm of white fire. The summons required an extra measure of white space over black ink. Superficially, Moses's miniature Aleph humbly implies a diminished state of the revealed Torah of black fire. But on a deeper level, it reflects an increase in the esoteric Torah of white fire. So again, we have black letters which represent that which we see. In a sense, that's what we call revealed Torah. It's plain for us to see and read. The page also consists of white space, and that white space is what we would call unrevealed Torah. It's that bit of wisdom which has yet to be teased out and to be made clear. And so Rav Kook is saying what's happening here is that the black letters impose themselves, if you will, on the blankness of the page. But the summons from God is something so intangible, so mysterious that's the whiteness. And so here, what we're learning from Rav Kook is that to make oneself humble is really not a sense of diminishment. It's really not a sacrifice of one's own personality. Quite the opposite. He's saying what it means is you're going deeper. You're going deeper into the mystery. You're going deeper into yourself, and you're accessing something which has yet to be given expression, a different kind of wisdom. When you go deeper, when you discover this wisdom that has yet to be revealed, you're opening up a world for others as well. So this notion about what we're entering into with Vayikra, Sefer Vayikra, we're not creating an elite that's now going to diminish other people. What we've done in Exodus is we've made clear that the people together are the ones that created the Mishkan. And God, at the end of Exodus, has, in a sense, given that sign of acknowledgement that it's all the people who are valuable, every single one. Now that we've got that established, we can go into the assignment and some specific responsibilities. But that doesn't make these people who are getting these specific responsibilities any better than anyone else. And just to make it clear enough, we have our primary facilitator of this whole story, Moses, who begins Sefer Vayikra with this sense of a humility that is not about self-diminishment so much as it is about an internal expansion that allows an awareness for others to enter into this world. So with that, I'd love to hear your own reactions and thoughts about what we've read this evening. Yeah, Paul, go ahead and unmute and share.
Yeah, the 99% of what I heard in the last part is why I tune in. I love it. I said the word enlightenment is probably the best adjective. Where I have the 1% trouble is at the very start, where you have a wall, let's say, and on one side, the sound can't get out of the wall. And then the other side of the wall, you have a listener. And somehow or other, that's the conditions you have, where you're outside the tent, nobody can hear anything. And inside the tent is where the speaker is. And somehow or other, I know Rashi and all these people, I respect them and so forth. But then when they just somehow or other break through that contradiction, somehow or other, I find myself a little unnerved by that. But that's the 1%. All the other stuff I really enjoy, but I still have trouble with that.
When you say you have trouble, you mean, tell me what it is.
Well, when somebody tells me that you have an impenetrable wall, and then they go about telling you all the different ways that it's penetrable, then I wonder about the logic. They're just making up stuff. Now, I'm not saying the stuff they make up is bad. It's just that it's not an explanation to me of the fact that you have an impenetrable wall. So I know that you don't look at the Bible, let's say literally, but if we, on the other hand, someone says they do understand that, then I have a trouble because I'm just thinking nowadays, you have a wall, you have a speaker on the other side, the wall's thick, you can't hear anything. Especially at this age, I don't hear so good anyway. But but that condition is bad.
Okay, thank you. Others? Richard?
Well, the tent is there's the Mishkan, and there's the tent before it, a portico, like a canopy, like a chuppah. And that's an anteroom, kind of. So I don't see the penetrable wall there. But God conceals himself under the cloud. So I'll go with what Rashi says. But I wanted to comment on.
I do too.
I wanted to comment on a couple of things, two things. One, what you say about white light. And there's this four-pronged shin. Shin has three prongs, but to be revealed in the end of days is the four-pronged shin. And what the four-pronged shin is really showing us is the three-pronged shin in the white spaces, the hidden deeper meaning. And that's what I think is you're alluding to, or the same process you're alluding to, that's what yet to be revealed. In this portion, I find at the beginning of verse 4, Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the Israelites. And when a person unwittingly incurs guilt in regard to any of the Lord's commandments about things not to be done, and does one of them, dash. And then verse 3, if it is the anointed priest who has incurred guilt, and goes on about who he's supposed to do. Goes on and on. It goes on, and if it's a chieftain, and if the chieftain incurs guilt, and then if any person among the populace. And what I get out of this is that if somebody incurs guilt in regard to any of the Lord's commandments, not about, not picking up something and returning it to someone else, is what someone who's just a regular person winds up doing. That's toward the end at 5, in a different whole chapter. Then that person unwittingly incurs it in regard to any of the Lord's commandments. Then the priests have to go through this expiation process. And what I thought was, what this was telling me is that, if somebody starts sinning against the commandments, the chieftains or the priests have done a poor job of instructing the people how to behave. And it's on them. So before we even get to making expiation for these people unwitting to do something, all the priests got to go through and what they did. And what they did was not properly somehow, leading somehow. And maybe that's the fix we're all in with all the so-called racism, because whatever it is, fear of other, that's going on in the world. We all came from the Tower of Babel and got all these different languages, and now we have places to be. Whatever that's created, this tumult or our world is in, has something to do maybe with the leaders not having been able to lead well enough to lead us to understand what those commandments are about. And so when you introduce the Leviticus as being about leadership, because they have something to be accountable for in our sins. Why do we sin? Well, maybe we didn't get a good history lesson. Maybe we didn't get treated by our teachers well enough to actually internalize these rules, because we're all one. So that's what I got out of this. I think that's hidden down there somewhere. And I just want to say one more thing, please, is that this portion of being small and humble, this is exactly the perennial philosophy. It's exactly Kabbalah, is that when you're lessened and not the self, then you're able to be a vehicle and come down and be part of the one rather than separated from the one and at war with others. And I think that this is what this is speaking to. That will be the presence of God in the world, the white light. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Richard. What you've done is, in a sense, you've redeemed the book of Leviticus from being seen as a departure from what's gone before, which was a story of a whole people. And then you start this book that's just about this kind of privileged class that gets to receive everyone's wealth. They get to partake of the wealth that other people have labored to create, and they get to be the first in line to read from the Torah when it comes to reading from the Torah in the synagogue. So instead, what you've done is you redeemed it from being seen as a book about a privileged hierarchical class of people to now kind of being seen as a story about the awesome responsibilities of providing leadership and being accountable. I like what you said, being accountable for good leadership. And the book of Exodus kind of ended by making it clear who really has the place of privilege here. And the place of privilege is held by the community. And people who have specific responsibilities are accountable to that place of privilege rather than the other way around.
Thank you, Rabbi. You warm my heart.
Thank you very much.
I also noticed that God didn't want any part of the honey or the leaven.
I noticed it. I also wrote down salt. That came up.
He wants the salt.
Wants the salt.
Wants us to,
salt?
be aware of, put salt in our wounds so we'll be appreciative of what that covenant means and what we're liable for. It's not just ourselves. So
right. And what Anna just said, salt is a preservative, right? It preserves.
Good.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Anna.
Others that things jumped out at you or provoked you, interested you in this week's Torah portion?
I've got something.
Yes, Todd, go ahead.
Rabbi, I brought it kind of full circle in my mind from where you started, and I wrote it down as I was thinking of it, that just as Genesis and Exodus are conditions precedent to Leviticus, so is humility a condition precedent to being a good, effective, and kind leader.
Yeah. Thank you, Todd. That's a really nice, succinct way of putting it. Sometimes people think that to be a leader means you have to assert yourself over others, and therefore you have to make others feel insignificant and smaller because that's what makes you so important and irreplaceable. And this is giving a very different, the opposite, if you will, opposite point of view. Thank you for pointing that out. Anyone else like to share something? And Steve, go ahead.
I feel ignorant at this point. It's like, okay, yeah, but is it not the people who are bringing these offerings for their sins to the priests to be intermediaries with God? Am I missing something here?
No. Well, what about that?
Well, talking about how it's all these privileged people making these offerings, I'm just seeing them being the tools to help the people who are. Something I read during the week too was saying, okay, you built the Mishnah, now we're going to talk about how we're going to use it. Mm-hmm. And to me, what that meant was you've got people sinning and they need to atone for their sins in one way or other with these offerings, and they bring their offerings to the tent of meeting, and it's the priests do the work. So I'm not following where this is dryly just about the priest's duties and all.
Well, yes, here. And in 4, the priests are the first ones who then have to make expiation. It starts out talking about if people have done something, and then it's a blank. And then we go through the list of what the priests have to do before they can get into. Go ahead.
Are they not the ones bringing the offerings, the bulls, or the cattle, or the sheep, or the birds, or the turtle doves? Are those not offerings brought by the people?
If the anointed priest who has incurred guilt so that blame falls upon the people, he shall offer for a sin, for the sin of which he is guilty, a bull of the herd.
Okay, I can see that.
See, if you look at chapter 4, verse 3, it's preceded by the last of 2. In fact, 2 is really, I don't see 2 is in, it says, speak to the Israelite people thus. When a person unwittingly incurs guilt in regard to any of the Lord's commandments about things not to be done and does one of them, dash.
Okay.
And then it talks about the priest. So in my reading of it, it's saying, listen, even before we talk about anybody who's in the populace or in the country or a person, before we talk about getting any explanation for them from these priests, the first thing we're going to talk about is what the priest has to do for having incurred guilt so that blame falls upon the people. What's the guilt that the priest has incurred? Not sufficiently educating or treating the people as equals, not sufficiently being humble in his role as having to groom people to honor the commandments. He hasn't done a good job of that. And he better get some expiation and figure that one out before we can even come back and talk to what we do with the country people or the regular people who incur guilt unwittingly. That's what I was saying. So I share exactly with what you're saying. That's why I was happy to find that.
To satisfy Steve a little bit is that the Kohanim don't own anything. The only way they don't do anything, the only dove or whatever that they have comes from the regular folks.
Yes.
So that basically you explain the flow. It comes from the regular folks. The Kohanim have something, but on the other hand, instead of using it for themselves, well, now they did something wrong. They got the other guy's stuff that they could have had for themselves. They got to, offer it up.
And elsewhere, we're told we're a people of priests.
Nation of priests. Yeah.
We're all a nation of priests. That means maybe that can be taken as a contra-Zionist notion. We're in a diaspora forever to bring this message of democracy to all governments. And we don't own land. That's not what we're about. I mean, I'm not saying that's only one answer. I'm saying that's a way of looking at how we need to comport ourselves in our relationship to the physical things we own. No, because at some level, we're all one thing. That's very hard to grasp and come to. And when he puts the ink up here, make him glow, well, gee, that's kind of like the third eye. And it makes me think of Cain, who had the writing on his forehead and then hid from God. Why? Because he doesn't want to make God feel bad about seeing him in his state, knowing that's going to make God unhappy to recognize me as a murderer. So he hides. He becomes very humble in that regard. And I just think this is a message to all to shrink the ego a little bit. Here I am talking about it, and I should stop now.
Let me bring this together just a little bit.
Thank you.
I say, from history, we know where this system ultimately led. It did lead to a system of privilege and of wealth among the priests. And this is setting up, if you will, kind of an idealistic system, which is the purpose of these sacrifices, only some of which have to do with sinning. There were all these other sacrifices having to do with offerings of peace and well-being and gratitude and so forth, and seasonal ones having to do with the festivals. So this is all designed to ensure that we express gratitude and acknowledgement that everything comes not just from us, but from something outside of us. and we want to maintain the relationship with that which is outside of us. And this is an idealistic system which now I'm understanding is needed to be preceded by the story of Exodus, needed to be preceded by the story of the entire people creating the Mishkan, where all these rituals are going to take place. That needed to be preceded by, at the very end of Exodus, God hovering over the Mishkan, preventing Moses from going inside for a moment, so that all the people would understand that they were the recipients of God's love and privilege, not just a few of them. Once that was made clear, then we can begin to have some groups of people performing what seems to be like a very privileged role within the community. So with that, I'm very grateful that we came together. I hope that we take to heart these messages about what it means to be a leader within a community is to expand the world for everyone. So with that, God bless you all. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Be well. Thank you for coming together. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.